Welcome, humanoids. It's Admiral Ackbar and Adam coming at you from our recording studios for episode 4 in our class on the philosophy of climate change. This will be the last lecture in part 1, where we're developing some tools and getting the big picture. And what we've covered so far is we know that we're in the Anthropocene. Climate change is part of this incredible period in time when humans have had such a huge impact on the planet in such a quick period of time. And we know that our approach to this is going to be problem-oriented, or what we call mode 2, or I just call philosophy or field philosophy. That's our method in general. Today, in this episode, we want to start putting some toolboxes, or some tools into our toolbox, right? So more specific methods, maps, compasses that we can have to help us think through the landscape as we conduct our problem-oriented inquiry into climate change. So that's what we're doing today. Here's what I want to cover. Talk a little bit about these tools in general, a little something about the policy process, and most of the time today we're going to be talking about these 3 frameworks. I'm going to use fracking as a case study to help illustrate the frameworks or the tools that we're going to use: problem orientation, social process, and the decision process. I'm only going to cover these in a kind of quick, rough and ready way in this lecture just to introduce them. These are going to be tools that we'll use throughout the course as we encounter different aspects of climate change. We'll constantly come back to these as kind of heuristics to help us make sense of what we're looking at. So the purpose is just to get a little familiar with them. We're going to go more in depth later on. And then we'll conclude by kind of looking ahead to the next section of the course. Now, Ackbar has been giving me a hard time because my last lecture was too long. So I'm going to try to do a little bit better this time, stay on target, and keep it under 20 minutes, which is kind of my goal for these. I failed last time, but we can do it this time. Okay, so a little bit on tools or theory in general. So mode 1 inquiry, which we talked about last time, disciplinary inquiry, one of the beauties of that is that it has these paradigms or methods to guide your inquiry, to focus your attention, to tell you what you're looking at and what's important to look at. Mode 2 needs something like that too, if it's not going to be just aimless wandering. So we also will have to have heuristics, concepts, theories, frameworks, or tools to make sense of what we're looking at, to find the signal from the noise, and to guide our path. So let's just call it theory in general, these tools. Theory comes from the Greek word theoria, which just means a calm and resourceful vision. It's like going up to a high place, like the mountaintop, and looking down and catching the most decisive features of the landscape. It's something that helps us to manage an otherwise debilitating and disorienting plurality and complexity and ambiguity. So we've already picked up some tools with the Anthropocene, some of our questions in the last lecture. We're going to have these 3 frameworks today, and then throughout the course we'll keep building up these tools to help in our thinking through climate change. Now I'm going to borrow these tools from the policy sciences, which are ultimately rooted, for those of you at home interested in the history of philosophy, in pragmatism, perhaps the crown jewel of American philosophy. Pragmatism really is a school of thought or a tradition that says that knowing the world is inseparable from our agency in the world. The truth isn't so much about representing the world as it is navigating your way successfully through the world. And so the policy sciences are a way of trying to navigate our way through the world. They deal with the policy process, which we'll talk about a lot, which just means the social dynamics that determines who gets what, when, and how. Now, I also wanted to distinguish policy and politics very roughly, just for now. Maybe we can polish this up a little bit later. By policy, for now, let's just say something like a plan that's guided by principles and it's aimed at goals, and ideally it's aimed at common interest goals. By politics, we mean something more like special interests of organizations and politicians. One example of of these two working in harmony that's in the news recently is the idea of extending an unemployment benefit to people who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. I heard on NPR the other morning that this counts as good politics and good policy. In other words, it's good for the common interest goals of a democratic society, that's the policy, and it's good for the politicians and their re-election bids that they're helping to take care of people in this way. So you want to look for when policy and politics like that come together and harmonize. An example of good politics maybe pork barrel spending, right? So spending on a special pet project for your constituents or your special interest group, maybe that funds your campaigns. That might be good politics because it's good for you and your re-election hopes, but it's not good policy because almost by definition, pork barrel spending projects are not good for the common interest. Right? Okay, so that's my rough and ready distinction there that might serve us. Let's go to our case study here. And I'm only going to cover this very quickly because the purpose in this lecture at least isn't an in-depth look at fracking. It's just to have a little something concrete to hang these general frameworks on top of as we walk through these three frameworks. So in a nutshell, fracking is a natural gas and oil extraction technique that involves drilling deep down into the surface of the earth. Often you have to turn the well bore horizontal, you see down here. So horizontal drilling is often a part of this. And then this little box is blown up here. You then actually literally explode through the pipe with these explosions, these perforating guns. You then force a bunch of water, chemicals, and sand called proppant into those holes you made to create cracks and fissures. That's the fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, that then allows the natural gas and oil, which is otherwise locked up too tight, to come flowing out and up to the surface. This is something I've studied quite a bit of. To make it more of a unique case study, look at here the city of Denton, the DFW Metroplex. This is a neat little animation. It's a little bit dated now, but it shows you in the early 2000s the rapid development of oil and gas. So the black dots are the traditional vertical wells. Around 2003, you see a lot of red dots. Those are the horizontal fracking wells popping up. What you don't see on this is urban growth and sprawl is happening at the same time. So you have this real clash of neighborhood development, suburban development, and natural gas extraction. And that created this situation, these series of nested problems that can be a little bit of a case study for us. Okay, so but the general frameworks that I'm going to use come out of this book by Susan Clark about the policy process. And this is something I've studied in many classes before. And I take these three frameworks out of it and I use them regularly. Again, as heuristics, that means like a rule of thumb or a guide, a compass, a map, a tool to help you think through problems because we're doing problem-oriented thinking. So here are these three frameworks, let's call them. Again, this is like a theory. One, the problem orientation. How do you frame and think through problems? Two, the social process. That is the social context within which problems are contested. And then three, the decision process, the policy process through which problems are addressed. I'm assuming here we have some kind of democratic form of governance in place. So those are the three frameworks. What I'm going to do now, the rest of the lecture, is really just quickly running through them, illustrating them. And again, this is just a quick once over because we're going to come back to these to help us throughout the course. Okay, there are 5 parts of the problem orientation. You have to have some goals. And then you have to have trends with respect to those goals. Okay, so you don't have a problem if whatever goal you have, the trends, what's happened in the past to get you this moment, are heading in the direction of that goal. You only have a problem if the trends are pointing away from your goal or your goals, right? Then you have to ask the conditioning factors, which is more of a contextual, fancy way of saying causes. There can be direct and indirect causes. That's why they call them conditioning factors. What's causing those trends, okay? So you have the causes of the trends towards or away from your goals. And then projections. In the future, if you stay status quo and you don't do anything different, will you achieve your goals or not? If you won't achieve your goals, you have a problem, right? And then alternatives, what else could we do other than the status quo if the trends aren't heading towards the goals, or if it looks like in the future we're going to not reach our goals? We need some alternative courses of action, some solutions to the problem. This isn't in itself, meant to be complicated. In fact, it's rather simple. That's the idea, is that you can pick it up. It's rather intuitive, right? So put this into a real quick run through of a case study. In the case of the city of Denton, that was experiencing rapid both urban sprawl and fracking development, you had multiple goals, and you almost always do, especially when it comes to complex and wicked problems. Well, you want to protect people's mineral rights and their surface property rights. You want to have economic development, but you also want to make sure that people's health and safety is protected and that they have a nice community to live in. So you have all of these goals that you're trying to juggle, as the city of Denton say, trying to come up with the policy here. And you can see quickly how this becomes more complex because the city of Denton is not the only one making decisions. You've got the state of Texas, you have the federal government, right? You have all these layers here. But we're just doing a quick look at, just make it simple to think through. What were the trends with respect to these goals? Well, there's a lot more fracking going on. You had a lot of urban growth going on, and you had conflicts, and I could list a lot more here. You had a worrying uptick in air pollution. Maybe that was connected to fracking. That was one of the big questions. What was causing these trends, right? This was hotly debated, but in general, lots of innovation, development of fracking finally came to fruition around 2000. You have increased consumption of natural gas globally and nationally. You had a growing economy during this time period. So again, there's a lot more I could put here, but this is just a rough and ready thing. If we didn't do anything, what would happen? Well, it would seem like if we looked in our crystal ball, we were just going to have more conflict, right? More problems, probably more air pollution, more disturbance to community livability, right? And so there was a clash here. And this is the problem space around which this case study revolved. What would we do about it? Well, you can always have status quo. Don't do anything if you think there's not a problem. And again, you're going to find some people that will think that, and other people think, no, we got to have radical changes. That's mode 2 inquiry. You have to deal with clashing values. We could revise the ordinance, and there's so many ways we could do that. We could ultimately ban fracking, right? There's actually different ways of doing that. So what should we do? There's all these alternatives on the table. Now, here's a really clear illustration, and I'm not too worried about where I get this from. You could even make up a thought experiment, right? So I'm not really telling you this isn't accurate. I haven't done a research on this case, but if you look at just population growth in the Colorado River water flows, you got flows from the upper basin projected to go way down, and the people depending on that water, the population to go way up. There's your trends, and if your goals are something like to have a sustainable population with adequate water resources, both in stream and for people to use, that's a classic problem, right? You got trends not pointing to those goals. So just to give you that, another quick little illustration, if that one helps a little bit more. But look, the point is, that helps to get your own thinking going as you map the problem space. But of course, that problem definition and orientation happens in a social context, right? And so now you have to think about the social process. So this is the second framework. And this too should be rather intuitive and almost simple, but it's good to kind of think through it. Well, who are the participants, right? What perspectives do they have? How do they see the issue? So the participants can be individuals, organizations, institutions. The perspectives are how they see it, what do they want, what expectations and assumptions do they have, what values are they bringing to bear on this case? The situation is, where are we in time and space? Where are we in social systems? Where are we in ecological systems? So situate this problem. Resources or base values. That is, what resources do people have to bear on this, and bring to bear on this problem, right? So power, wealth, respect, expertise, These are the resources that people have in different forms and to different amounts. Strategies. What strategies are they using to achieve their goals? Research, debate, propaganda, advertising, protesting, fighting, monkey wrenching. What are the strategies? What are they using? And then outcomes. So what happens as a result of all of those participants with their perspectives and their strategies and their resources interacting? Okay. Who loses? Who gains? Do new practices, do new institutions emerge? Do we shift the way that we're thinking about this and handling it? And I put it kind of in a circle form because this is all interrelated, right? You could think almost of a web here. So in the fracking case study, real quick, gosh, you had everybody from environmentalists to the oil and gas industry involved. You had city residents. You had mineral rights owners who didn't live in the city. You had a variety of perspectives around what health and safety and community livability look like, what property rights should look like, what economic growth should look like. This was all happening in the context of rapid growth, right? This is our situation, growing city, growing fracking, the resources, people had different access to power. People had different access to knowledge and expertise, to advertising, right, to media resources. Lots of strategies were used at first, mostly working through the local city government, and then a group that I helped eventually adopted a different strategy, which is a local referendum, so a direct sort of petition of the people. And the outcomes, boy, in this case, were manifold, complex, messy, crazy. It eventually went to Austin, and the Texas state legislature weighed in and banned the city's fracking ban, and it's had these reverberations that continue today. So that's just one way to think about that social process. Last one, the decision process. This is the process through which problems are addressed by policymaking. And you can think of this, although it's too simplistic, but for now it's great. Just think of it as a stepwise function from point 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So think of these kind of in sequence. You start with intelligence gathering. You're doing research. This is where science comes in primarily, but not only. Actually, science comes throughout all of this thing. You're gathering intelligence. Then you have a process of people promoting. I want policy A. I want policy B. Prescription is the actual decision. Here it is. It's written into law. Invocation is when that is enforced by the police or an inspection agency or something like that. Application is when you adjudicate disagreements about how it's being enforced. So usually that's in the court system. And then appraisal is a process of, again, science would be here as well, against throughout, of how well is this working? Is it achieving our goals or not? And then policies can be terminated and brought to an end. In the fracking case study, a lot of work went in to try to figure out what's going on with fracking in air quality, with water quality, with noise levels. So there were studies. What does it do to real estate values, right, around the surrounding neighborhoods? A lot of that was the intelligence process. Then you have city council public hearings where people come and they have their 3 minutes at a microphone and say, we should do this, we should do that. That's part of the promotion process. Then you have city council as one decision-making body actually writing a law. Here's the ordinance. Here's the law. That's prescription. This is the way fracking is going to happen. And then they have a gas well inspection agency which enforces that law, so they invoke it. And then you might have people bringing lawsuits to bear, and it goes to the courts about, well, that wasn't a good law. It's not legal. It's a bad law. It's a good. That's the application. Then you have a process, both informally and formally, of appraising it. And then eventually this is a 2013 ordinance I'm talking about, was terminated by a 2014 ban. And then the ban actually was terminated by a 2015 legislative action. Okay, so that just gives you a quick overview. Ackbar, I know I'm pushing my time limits again. I'm so sorry. I'm going to get better at this. Really important, though, to emphasize here, now that we bring these three frameworks together, we should ask, what does a healthy policy process look like in a democracy? Well, it needs to be fair, inclusive, rational, transparent, flexible, meaning it has to be revisable as we gain more evidence and insight and learn about problems. And does it aim to clarify and secure the common interest? I think that's a term we should talk a lot about with climate change. What is the common interest? There's so much fighting going on, but don't we all value, let's say, I don't know, clean water, clean air, um, habitats that allow us to grow our food and live in our cities, right? Can we find common interests and build from there? I listed some here on the highest level: human dignity, social justice, environmental sustainability. These are common interest goals, right, around which you can build a healthy policy process. Okay, that wraps up section 1. Again, we just try to get a big picture with the Anthropocene. We talked about mode 2 inquiry as our way into climate change, problem-oriented inquiry. And then in this lecture, we looked at ways to think about problems more specifically, these 3 frameworks: the problem orientation, the social process, and the decision process. And I know it was rough and ready and kind of quick, but again, we're going to be using these throughout the course. So this is just an introduction to these tools. Now, next time, we're going to turn to Module 2, Section 2 of the class, and we're going to try to build up some basic climate science literacy and pick up some vocabulary so that we have a solid foundation as we then go into climate science politics and really start using these tools to think through the problems of climate change. All right, well, as Admiral Ackbar says, critical thinking is more powerful than the Death Star. And I hope you all have a good one. Until next time, may the force be with you.